the end of a song. Hey everybody, I'm Jeremy. I'm going to be your host for today. I'll tell you a little bit about what a host means in just a second. It's pretty simple, but welcome to all of you to the session today. I hope that for those of you who are in the room, you've gotten your snack, which we've eaten so much cake already, which is fun. Cake and barbecue, it's a great time, so I hope you have that. If you're joining us online, thank you so much for being here today. So just a quick reminder, some housekeeping on how Q&A will work for this session. So this year you can participate in the Q&A by submitting your questions through the session app. So if you want to do that right now so that you're ready to do so later when you have a question, you can open the app and just choose session Q&A, locate your session, and then you can submit or upvote questions right there. And I will be back at the end to facilitate some of those questions for you today. So we have a great session today, Sparking Business Innovation Through Broader Mobile Adoption, also more simply known as SBITBMA. So that's a joke, feel free to laugh. All right, we have a great group of speakers. I'm going to invite them up now and they're going to introduce themselves to you.
That was a good one last time.
Hello, and thanks for joining today. I am Michael Covington. I'm Vice President of Portfolio Strategy with Jamf.
Hey everyone, I'm Rick Lucero. I'm lucky enough to lead our business development team focused on industry solutions for mobility.
I'm Tim Knox. I am the Senior Consulting Engineer for all of our industry solutions, which basically just means if you have an iPad or an iPhone and you want to get weird with it, let me know.
That's Tim. And hey everyone, my name's Nick McGilvery. I'm a Senior Security Sales Engineer out of the Bay Area. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about our ZTNA solution today. So Michael.
All right, and I think despite the rather lengthy title, this session is really about mobility. And really what we're hoping to do here, despite the fact that you've got 4 Jamfs on stage, is do our best to represent some of the challenges that we're hearing from a lot of organizations that are working to innovate with mobile, and really where we see the most innovation on the front lines is with mobile adoption, iPhones, iPads, even Apple TVs, which aren't quite mobile, but they kind of fit into this weird space of being used not exactly at a desk. We're helping to kind of walk through some of the challenges and also highlight some of the successful case studies that we've seen where people have been being able to use these technologies in new and clever ways. I'm just going to say a few words here at the start, and I think really what we want to do for the session is walk you through some of the building blocks that we see, despite the fact that every industry that we're going to talk about today has their own unique challenges and their own very specific use cases. There's really a shared set of building blocks that can be used across the board to enable mobile devices to be used in these scenarios, and so we'll walk through some of that. We'll talk to you about how we are seeing mobile expand, and the focus here is really going to be on line of business applications. I think what excites me the most about mobile is not the form factor, it's what people are doing on those mobile devices, how they're leveraging sensors, how they're enabling people to bring personal mobile devices in to be used for business applications, and the rich business intelligence that's now flowing across mobile devices. It's not corporate email and contacts and calendars anymore. It's meaningful business applications, and I think that's a real takeaway for me as we look at this. And throughout the session, we're going to be showcasing some customer stories. We've all seen mobile devices, I think, in our everyday lives being used in clever ways and in ways that help expedite the way that we get services. And maybe even in some of your lines of work today, you're already embracing mobility to deliver services to your customers and partners in creative ways. These are just a couple of examples, whether it be electronic flight bags, which have completely revolutionized the way that pilots kind of approach the cockpit and manage the data that they need to be successful in getting us safely from one destination to the next. Retail environments where you don't have to carry cash around anymore. You don't even need a card. You just need a phone or a watch and you can make a payment. And in a lot of these scenarios, we're starting to see that the mobile device, which was, I think, originally designed to be a one-to-one device, doesn't have to be used that way anymore. And we're also seeing that devices aren't always deployed to an individual to carry around and use in conjunction with a Mac. that maybe now they're just deployed to an environment and a group of people come in and utilize that device. So the shared experience is now something that we're having to take into account to make sure that as we think about the technologies that get layered on top of the hardware, how is it that we expose that and make it available for business users? Last note for me, you heard it in the keynote, we're going to continue to kind of push the theme of trusted access, and I really just want to make a note today that as we talk about industry solutions, as we talk about mobility, there is absolutely a way to incorporate the trusted access experience into the outcomes that you deliver with mobility as well. We want to make sure that every mobile device that's being used for work can be enrolled safely and securely, that you can bind identity, whether it's a one-to-one device or a shared device, in a meaningful way that you can assess and rely upon over time, and that we can make the experiences on these devices better by kind of bringing that identity in securely, but also making it so the user doesn't have to type passwords in anymore. I think we really are on the cusp of a passwordless future that's going to be realized for mobile workers first, and so it's exciting times, I think, to think about that full workflow from getting into the device that may not have been enrolled before the user touched it, all the way through to touching business applications and services that sit on the other side. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rick to say a few words about applications. So thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Michael.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael. Yeah, so when we think about a device, there's a couple ways we could look at it. And one of them would be a device is a person, or it's assigned to a person. The other side is a purpose, and then oftentimes you connect the two. So it's a person and purpose type conversation. Everything I'm going to talk about now is about the applications and starting there. So today there's about 235,000 applications on the Business App Store. That's 235,000. That number doesn't take into account custom apps or in-house apps that are being deployed all over the world. So to put that in perspective, when Apple launched the App Store in 2008, there were 500. Not 500 business apps, but 500 total. So the growth rate has been exponential. The launch of the App Store, it not only evolved the iPhone, like Michael said, from primarily a personal communications device, it turned it into an all-in-one powerhouse. And what they did is they created an explosion of innovation along the way. So there's an app for that, isn't just like a quirky marketing line. It was kind of like an authentic statement of what our future relationship with technology would end up being. So when you take that innovation and you couple it with the fact that present-day organizations of all sizes are looking for every way to boost productivity, streamline operations, or even improve their security stance, it's significant. And then we have 15 years of experience from firsthand knowledge that, for the most part, monolithic apps mostly don't work. So it makes sense that there's 235,000 business applications. In today's day and age, organizations turn to all of those apps to connect the dots and support the individuals where the work is happening. So I'm going to go over two companies that have kind of started their process of innovation with a purpose and created some really cool solutions. So Rituals Cosmetics, they were founded in the year 2000. They have about 840 locations worldwide, and they also have about 2,700 shops within a shop throughout department stores in about 33 countries all over the globe. And from the early days, they started off with this concept of providing a smarter, more peaceful environment for their retail teams. So they started with things such as, how can we create a better experience for both clients and our employees while also delivering on company performance metrics? How can we create flexibility, and what does that mean for our retail employees? Well, today the store employees can read company newsletters, important communications, product information on one app. They can do all their corporate training to maintain their compliance and security posture in another app. And they could even order inventory and manage stock from a third app, all from one single iPad. The devices have given them so much flexibility for their employees, and they're more efficient. So while they've been able to empower their employees to do great things, they've also reduced friction for the customer. So they deploy a really cool mobile point of sales app that eliminates the need for customers to queue when they're checking out. They could have a personalized experience with a customer service agent, and then that person could also ring them up for their purchase. It's so personalized, in fact, that they have an application called Skin Analyzer, where they could take a picture of someone's face, they render it into a 3D file, and then view it from arbitrary angles to make sure that they're recommending the best type of skincare. So there's an app for that. It's really cool. If you want to learn more about how Rituals did it, there's a great write-up on jamf.com. They continue to innovate, so please check them out. But a great organization. The second organization I'm going to talk about is Stanley Black & Decker. So they might actually be in the room here today. They're definitely here at JNUC. They're 200 years old, and they're a world-class tool manufacturing group. And they started with a very specific goal on their tech journey, and that was bring digital transformation to their manufacturing teams. The Stanley Black & Decker team, who worked very hard to solve the disconnect between technology and their employees across the entire organization, especially to the people that they call the makers. And the makers are the people who are on the floor actually building product. Their aim was simple. It's to extend digital solutions across the company and bridge that gap so those people can have tools just like everyone else. However, the devices had a physical component to it, and the physical component was these devices were actually going to be on a manufacturing floor. They had to solve for that. So things like, how are we going to charge the devices? How are we going to account for the devices and secure the devices? How would we get devices checked out to employees and know who was doing what? Well, what they did was they turned to a solution called DevLock, made by a company called Cribmaster, which is a physical locking station created by a sub of Stanley Black & Decker. And what came out of it was a access-controlled locker that had all the things that would allow them to secure and manage the devices. And it joined the software stack. So basically what they created was a holistic stack that put Apple native technology via APU with some Jamf management capabilities. And it allowed them to create a self-checkout process in a locker, basically, where an employee comes to work. They take any device that's available, and they use it. If there's an issue with the device, they've created a tier 0 support structure where that employee or the maker plugs the device back into any available slot, notes that device isn't functioning as anticipated, and then automatically it triggers a wipe of that device. They reinstall it, and it's ready to go for the next maker. Eliminating tickets, no IT calls, all of that stuff. So improving their journey along the way. The immediate benefits are pretty straightforward. Employees have access to reliable devices. They have enhanced efficiencies. They have more personal safety information available to them, and they have overall better job fulfillment. The innovation really is happening on the floor with those employees, and it started with them talking to them. So if you want to see more about that specific solution, Tim and the Stanley Black & Decker team have a session tomorrow at 2:30 called How Stanley Black & Decker Built a Shared iPad Solution, or Locker Solution with Cribmaster. So I think you know what you're signing up for if you go there. But as you can see, some of these organizations, it comes down to what they're trying to accomplish and then working together to figure out how you can accomplish that. So Tim, would you mind going a step farther and taking us through how different types of deployment methodologies exist most frequently in the organizations we work for on all these projects?
Yeah, as long as you hand me that.
You got it.
Totally. Yeah, in the Stanley Black & Decker session tomorrow, we go into all the details on how we integrated with the back end of their API and connect those things. It's really neat. You scan a badge and a door opens, you take the device, and there you go. It's pretty slick.
Yeah.
All right, so my notes are right down there. We spent a lot of time over the last couple of years talking to a ton of organizations about how they want to use their mobile devices in a lot of different kinds of environments. And for the purpose of the next, say, 10 or 15 minutes or so, we've broken that down into 3 distinct buckets. The people who have a device and IT knows exactly who they are and what they're using it for. The purpose-built devices where IT may not know who's using that device at any given time. And the BYO devices, the ones where people have brought their own stuff, and they're going to be still managed, and have all access to their own corporate data. When we look at BYO, we look for 3 things that need to happen. The first is that they still need to be usable. They need to work like anything else. All the apps need to work like any other app, just like they would on their personal phones, because it is. Organizational data still needs to be enterprise secure. We're going to talk a lot about security. Nick, in particular, is going to talk a lot about security in a little bit. And we still need to be able to allow to configure all of the BYO devices through the Mac management. And if you add Jamf Protect, you'll be able to employ workflows that vet those apps to remove vulnerabilities. They can run security checks to identify out-of-date or vulnerable OS versions. And adding Connect grants the ability to only authorize users on enrolled devices to access work apps and data. But I won't get into that. You're going to talk about all that in a little bit. On the Jamf side, Basically, nothing is different from deploying of apps and books and all of that through config profiles and smart groups. That's all pretty straightforward. It's pretty easy to set up as well. In the settings section, there's a user-initiated enrollment section. I'm going to show that on the next slide. You basically just tick a box. You still need to federate accounts into managed Apple IDs, however, but in this case, it's actually worth it. We did it at Jamf a few years ago, and I actually like having it on my personal device. I don't like carrying 2 devices, and I still like being able to mute my sales team, like Rick, whenever I want to. I still have all that ability to have all of that. I barely want to carry 2 devices, so like carrying one is perfect. So, if you still want a user to log in on their own iCloud partition, you need to federate their ID, and you need to define the Jamf Pro enrollment information in a JSON file and host it on a web server for account-driven user enrollment. On the Jamf side, you just do this, though. It's pretty easy. We're going to, is that video? There we go. On the Jamf side, you go to Settings, Global, User-Initiated Enrollments, and then you tick a box. Pretty straightforward. It's the federating of the managed Apple IDs that'll always get you. We can help you through that. So can our friends at Apple. All right, so that was the easy one. Things get a little bit more complicated if you have devices in your stores or airport or manufacturing plant or wherever you have them, but you don't always, or maybe ever, know who is using that device. You only know what the device is being used for, and it has to be flexible enough to handle anything that needs doing while still not allowing you to do things that you shouldn't be doing on these devices. And you still have to do it in a secure way, which we're going to keep talking about all week long. I promise you that. The drum I've been beating at Jamf the last couple of years is that in places like this, there really isn't anyone who knows better what to do with those devices in their hands than the people who actually have those devices in their own hands. I know that isn't universally true, but I've done my time in the Geek Squad mines back in the day, and being able to grant managers on duty the ability to change the context of the device based on the rush we were having and the job that needed doing on those devices would have been pretty great. Let me hit that button here. Did it go? There we are. The views of mobile devices have matured a lot since those days in the dark ages of me being with the Geek Squad. But the problems and solutions to those problems have matured. These devices are now not always in office buildings assigned to a user with IT down the hall. So how you manage those devices will be different. Jamf can force apps to use Wi-Fi as opposed to cellular, for example, and Jamf MDM with the Jamf Trust app can give you even more control. Because IT isn't always going to be able to help you activate that new device, we've partnered with the people who can help you smooth out that initial touch point. Because what we really want to be able to do is to be able to ship a user their phone and have them be able to activate it with as few taps as possible. TruePhone's SMDP plus eSIM provisioning server is able to allow Jamf Pro to activate the eSIM without any additional information. Now, I've sped this up a little bit, as I'm sure you can tell, but I'm not faking any taps on the glass. This is actually real. You can use inventory preload to define the ISO 3166 country code, so it gets all the correct routing. It's super slick. You can even get the visual voicemail, which I think will pop up here in a second. The best of Apple and the best of eSIMs. I've actually seen this in practice with a customer in hand, literally turning on a phone for the very first time and watching the eSIM provision itself without needing to touch it at all. Speeds up that process significantly and reduces the fact that humans will definitely mess it up if they have to tap anything. So just making the robots do it is far more successful. We have created a big pain point is the updating of OSs. It's something we talk about constantly. It's every conversation I feel like I have with OS and deployments is how do we manage the updates? How do we do this in a nice and seamless way? We've updated the GUI a little bit on the Jamf side where I've created a smart group that's looking for a particular version, and I can just tick a little box there and send the update to that collection of devices. It's the same kind of idea as what we had with the mass action section in the inventory, but being able to actually have a button that you can define a smart group and really look for it in a little bit of a seamlesslier way, that'll work,
That's a word.
is
That's a word.
pretty good. And the OS smart group I created for that one, pretty straightforward. It is the OS version is below X because we don't want to have it. It doesn't make sense to send it to something that isn't. Checked in with his Y days because if it's been sitting on a shelf for 3 years, don't waste your time with it. Hardware version, and then you can target the devices with that. This part gets a little interesting. I want to make sure I'm on time here. We're good?
We're good to go.
All right, great. So Jamf has a lot of tools. Finding fun and interesting ways to combine them and solve common problems is the thing that I get most excited about. So what happens if you want to combine the Jamf Trust app with Jamf Setup to add an extra level of security to a device that can be picked up by anyone? So this is just a device on a manufacturing floor. I'm opening the Jamf app here to show that I do not have a passcode on the device. I have that so anybody can pick up any device. There's nothing available on it except for Jamf Setup and Jamf Trust. To prove I don't have anything up my sleeve, looking at the settings app here, no passcode on the device. All right, so now I can make a choice that I want to be a floor supervisor. Now I'm setting a configuration profile, now that I've made that selection, saying, now that you're a floor supervisor, you need a passcode on this device. But what if they ignore it? What if they say, I don't really want to do that? And so I have a flag on the Jamf Trust side that says, you need to have that. And I've actually flagged an extension attribute that says, if you don't, you're falling into a smart group where I've restricted everything. So even though I have created, you've said you're a floor manager, if you don't follow the rules that say you need a passcode, you still don't have access to anything. I've sped this a little bit up too, just to hurry things along for the demo. But once I create the passcode, Jamf Trust sees that. It flips the extension attribute on the back end, removes me from that exclusion group, and now I'm back to a floor supervisor and I have access to the apps that I want. There are a lot of things that I think you'll be able to do with this. I think it's kind of interesting, but there's a lot of ways that you should be able to. Let's see if I make this big. Do I do that? Yeah, so this is a more holistic way of covering more common problems like jailbreak, OS versions, which can be detected faster than having to build smart groups for all of that. But the neat thing that I think is really interesting that I'm going to mess around with a lot more in the next couple of weeks is I can define an extension attribute that is controlled by something that is being seen on the device itself. So now that I have an app on there and I've got some more controls over it, I can start moving things in and out of smart groups based on the detection that's actually happening on the device itself. I'm not sure exactly how cool that's going to be, but I feel like it's going to be really cool, so I wanted to talk about it because I bet there's going to be people out there who will be able to do way more interesting things, hopefully in their own environments. All right, last but not least, if you have a device that you're deploying to your store or your construction site or your hospital or wherever it is you're being put, you're using it, one-to-one, in my opinion, is always going to be best. If I were king of the world, I would give everybody an iPad and an iPhone, and I would customize everything for everyone. I know that isn't the world we live in. We can use the original OG setup and reset workflow and prompt users to create the right groups, and we can use reset to nuke everything at the end. That is a bit onerous. I'm hoping that in the next couple of days we can talk about return to service a little bit more, and we can see how we might be able to use that new functionality to speed that process up, still making sure that all the data goes away, but getting it back online in a much more efficient way. And the Shortcuts app, that's the other thing that I'm pretty stoked about this whole mobility thing. If you haven't looked into the Apple Shortcuts, we're starting to wrap our own API endpoints to create clickable, draggable things into Shortcuts. Should be really interesting things if you have tethered solutions to be able to create more customizable APU sort of actions on a Mac to tethered devices. Very cool. So knowing who is on the device gives us much more insight about how they're using the device. It's hard to hand a bunch of devices out with apps on them and have no idea what utilization is actually like, which brings us around full circle to the top of my chunk. Devices for a purpose, or BYO, everything still needs to be managed like any other endpoint. And we have more tools than ever to make that experience excellent for the person who's using it and not heart-stopping for the admins who are deploying it. I know you have opinions on how these devices are being used and how we can actually see more insight into it, so I'm going to hand this to you.
Thank you.
And I'm going to go
Appreciate it,
sit down. Thanks.
All right, and then there was one, just me. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about these endpoint-related threats. I'm then going to cover how we can help manage mobile app risk, and then I'm going to spend the majority of my chunk talking about how we can then give secure access to your infrastructure. So starting at this slide here, I'm not going to dive too in depth because Tim just covered it, but from a compliance and mobile app risk, I like to really create a subcategory here, thinking about those on-device related threats. So again, from compliance, this could be anything like an out-of-date OS, maybe a vulnerable OS that falls on a recent Apple CV, or a no passcode like Tim just showed. And then from a mobile app risk perspective, this could be anything from a malicious application to a risky application. So again, That's kind of the first subcategory I like to break up our endpoint protection. The second piece, probably most prominent, I would say, on mobile, are things in the network. So it could be an infrastructure risk, like a adversary in the middle attack, maybe an SSL strip, or even a risky hotspot if you're at the airport. And then I would say probably most prominent for mobile are those content risks. So things such as phishing, cryptojacking, malicious network traffic, spam. Oftentimes these get on the device via maybe a text message or Facebook Messenger or email. We have the ability to both detect that content risk as well as block that. All right, moving along to the mobile app risk point of view, I wanted to put this slide in here. But essentially what this can do is give us further insight into your Jamf Pro app catalog. So you'll see there on the right the apps by risk level. We have about 318 total apps in this demo environment. What we're actually looking for are very specific behavioral analysis on things such as maybe malicious code patterns, suspicious dev profiles, and other dangerous permissions. I would say most prominently, because this also does work on for Intune and Workspace ONE, most prominently in my experience, we do see a lot of apps from the Google Play Store that show up here as malicious. But you'd be surprised every now and then we do get an Apple specific app version that pops up on this list. Great, so now that I've kind of established, and as did Tim and Rick and team, more of the endpoint features, I wanted to now focus our attention on how, once we've established those safe parameters, how can we give secure access to your infrastructure? So I went ahead and broke it up into three kind of main categories that I like to talk about. The first being how simple and secure this solution is. The second being how lightning fast this remote access can be for mobile. And lastly, I'm going to talk more about what Tim spoke about as to the risk-based access controls. So I put up this picture here because I'm going to refer back to it a couple times, but we're really focusing on the left side of the cloud here with that software-defined perimeter where we're saying, hey, does this user have the correct access, and is this user's device safe and secure? If so, let's give them access via one of these per app, per connection microtunnels to their SaaS or enterprise applications. For what it's worth, on the right-hand side, maybe this is not your quote-unquote VPN traffic, but we still can provide policies on content filtering and all those on-device and network-related threats, and just resolve those IPs as well. But that would be more of your general internet traffic. So double-clicking into each one of these categories, from a simplicity perspective, as an admin from an IT or security point of view, you no longer have to manage and renew different certificates. What we actually do is we use your identity provider for authentication. And what that means from an IT admin or security perspective is that you no longer have to manage certificates. All that's required is for you to set up an OIDC connection from our Jamf Security Cloud portal to your identity provider. And that essentially allows us to bootstrap your IDP logins and give access to both your SaaS and enterprise apps. So that sounds great, and a lot of admins that I've spoken to have found a lot of benefit and a lot of time saved because we don't have to manage and renew those certs. From a rapid network transition perspective, I wanted to put this point in here because one of the main protocols we're utilizing to get from the endpoint to our cloud is WireGuard, which is really good for the single packet authentication and rapid network transition. So for instance, I went from the airport yesterday in an Uber to my hotel. It's really good when we talk about that ZTNA access not to have that TCP back and forth, which will inevitably drop that connection. So it's really great for this mobile use case we're talking about. And I wanted to throw this piece in because I know a lot of Jamf admins are obviously familiar from an Apple perspective, but this also does support Android and Windows. Great, so to kind of, let's go forward a little bit, cool. Awesome, so the next piece again is how lightning fast remote access this can actually be. So again, referring back to that diagram, this is all about the per app, per connection microtunnel where we're saying, hey, does the user have access? And is this device safe and secure? This is really good for those low latency, high bandwidth type applications because of the protocols in which we're utilizing. But rather than dive into the details of WireGuard, I wanted to talk about how you might use this in your fleet and some of the main use cases that we see because of this fast remote access. So I'd say top of the list from a mobile perspective, in my opinion, is the ability to quote unquote sanction your device for SaaS access. To give you an example, in my pocket or in my backpack, I have my phone, my Jamf BYO phone. And on the business partition side, in order for me to access apps like Dropbox, Slack, email, and among a couple other SaaS apps, I have to be coming from a Jamf Trust IP. So if I went on my spouse's laptop or if I went on the local library and tried to put in my Okta SSO credentials, I would inevitably get blocked because I'm not coming from a quote-unquote sanctioned device. So I bring up the BYO use case because I wanted to make apparent that yes, this obviously works for the managed devices that you have, for your Mac or your corporate devices, but it also does work from a BYO perspective. The other point, I guess it's the third point I wanted to talk about, is that this is a very remote-friendly solution in the sense that for those SaaS applications, I have the ability to route out of the nearest data center. So I'll take Michael as a sample because he travels a lot, but say he were to go to New Zealand, then Australia, then back to Canada, then to the US, we have the ability to egress out of the closest data center. So we have that really great security that I've mentioned and some of the protocols in which we're utilizing while still having great latency for the end user. So kind of a win-win in my eyes. And the third and final point, which I'm going to elaborate in the subsequent slides, is our least privilege access. So like I said, I'm an SC, and a lot of times I like to do different analogies and metaphors on my calls. And one of the analogies I do with that of a legacy VPN, it's a little dated, but I talk about a Game of Thrones castle and how with a legacy VPN, in order to get access to your VPN apps, you have to go past a gatekeeper and know your credentials. Once you get past that gatekeeper, though, there's a chance for lateral movement, and there's a chance to see other apps that reside in that Game of Thrones castle. The way that we view our solution and the way that we've done it with least privilege access is we're only saying, hey, dev user, you can only access this AWS 1 app. If you try to access app 2, 3, 4, 5, the packet's actually going to be dropped before it reaches our infrastructure. So sadly, we're moving away from the Game of Thrones example. How would you set this up? It might sound simple when I mention Game of Thrones, but essentially there are 3 steps to this process. The first step is we create a custom IPsec site-to-site tunnel. So you'll see here, or I guess you won't see here, but in settings, you match up the proposals and ciphers. You have a common shared key, kind of basic setup when we talk about IPsec site-to-site. But really what I wanted everyone to get out of this slide here is you'll see the Jamf subnet, the 192-24, underneath the Jamf Security Cloud. What this means, again, going back to that dev user example, if it's a dev user who should have RDP access into some application, and we've defined an access policy, which will be step 3 here, they're going to originate from that private Jamf subnet. And on my AWS side, I'm going to see that traffic and allow it to whatever application we deem that they should have access to. If it's a sales or marketing user trying to do the same and we don't have an access policy defined, packet's actually going to be dropped on the Jamf side before it even reaches AWS. So like I said, there's no chance for that east and west lateral movement. The second step is, OK, great, we got into your firewall, but how do we go ahead and resolve those internal host names? We go ahead and set up the custom DNS zone, which essentially allows us to act as a DNS forwarder for your internal domains. So you'll see here I have my zone name. I have all the specific domains of the JNUC 2023 apps I want to connect to. And then we would add those authoritative name servers. The last step, again, going back to that dev example, is we go here and say, from a per app perspective, I want to give my contractors access to these enterprise apps. I want to give everyone access to the new JNUC app. I want to give everyone access to Outlook. But what you can do here is actually do policies based on a per app basis, or you can use a wildcard and say, for all these AWS apps, star.company.com, they're going to access these. So it's kind of a way for you to, quote unquote, split tunnel that traffic and not just do it on a per app basis if that's a use case. And for what it's worth, we can also do access policies via IP or subnet as well. It's not just hostname based. All right, I know I'm talking a lot. I'm almost done, I promise. The last 2 slides here, again, this goes back to that third use case about the ability to do the continuous conditional access check, in which we're using a lot of the same security principles that Tim and Rick and Michael have talked about. But to give you an example for what Tim was talking about is we can say, hey, user doesn't have a passcode. Let's go ahead and block access to Office 365. Or, hey, user has a malicious application or maybe a vulnerable operating system or malware on the device. Let's go ahead and block access. So this is essentially a way for us to give risk-based policies to the enterprise and SaaS applications. And this is not the most in-depth of examples, but I wanted to go ahead and show it anyways. Let's see, do I need to press one more time? I do. So essentially, this is the sanctioned device use case in which we're saying, hey, user, user is trying to access an Outlook site, but they're going to enter their local password, if you will. And we're going to get an error message saying, hey, you can actually not access this application right now. So I know this is on a Mac, but the same thing would work for a mobile perspective. So if you want to lock down Outlook, Slack, Dropbox, some of those sensitive SaaS apps, we must require the user to be egressing through the Jamf Trust IPs. So the user has to sign in to Jamf Trust, enable that. On the Microsoft side, they're going to see our nearest data center or whatever data centers we're routing, and then that user is able to get access to whatever SaaS or enterprise app you specify. So again, not the most in-depth of examples, but I just wanted to show everyone because maybe right now you have remote users that are accessing these SaaS or enterprise apps on any device. This is a very great way to lock those users down. Well, thank you all for listening. Maybe I'll call up everyone else to do some Q&A.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Nick. Appreciate it. Let's give a round of applause to our speakers as they come on up for just a couple questions here. All right, so we have a couple questions that came in, so I will just go through a couple of these submitted from the room and from the 13 people that are streaming. So thanks for submitting questions. All right, first question is anyone working on a locker for iPhones? The current ones on the market have space for computers and iPads, which would take up too much space if using iPhones.
I think I know who asked this question, and I don't know of anybody who is doing it exactly, but it would be cool to ask that question for the audience to see if there are lockers specifically that would be form factor for an iPhone, so it's much smaller, much more condensed, so it's not taking up a huge amount of space in a whatever environment it might be. If anybody knows of any, let us know, because we'd really love to see that. Because carts are great, carts are wonderful, we love all the carts, and EDU has a ton of that, but a locker system where you can walk up to it and plug it in and charge it, and maybe get Ethernet through that charging bay, and have it small enough, that would be pretty killer.
All
right.
Can I do the business development side? If you have specifics, come talk to me. Either find me here or send me an email. Let's talk through it so we can understand what you're looking for, because although we might not know someone today, we might be able to find someone. So please, yeah, I would love to have that conversation.
Perfect, thank you. Next question is from Jackson. How are you seeing healthcare and other heavily regulated industries comply with keeping PHI and PII on shared devices private without shared iPad, which is slow and clunky?
I have my own opinions, because I've worked in that space for a long time. I'm interested in what you have to say.
I'll let you go first.
All right. The easiest and quickest way is to don't share the devices, because then that's best. But if you have to and you need to, shared iPad for business can be tricky to use in a lot of those environments. Nuking everything is an onerous task, as I said, because then you have to kill all of the data. Keeping everything in the cloud, so you're only allowing access to the specific apps that they need to do their job and nothing else. Not storing anything on the photo reel or using the Notes app. Basically nothing Apple native. Sorry, Apple friends. But using Rover, or Haiku, or Canto, keeping everything stored within that app, isolated there. Then you just got to make sure they sign out of those apps, because that's really the tricky part. Ideally, it's some sort of short amount of time for it to be to expire, but there's no easy answer to that. But maybe you guys have a better idea.
I might just add to this. I think that sadly, the answer is going to be distinct to every organization.
That's also true.
And I like to bring it back to some basic frameworks. What is it that defines security and compliance in your environment? So specifically around healthcare, I think we started off on the right track. Shared devices, or personal devices at the very least, probably aren't appropriate in that environment. I think then we have to start to think about how we build up trust, especially over time, because I think every organization coming in is not going to be able to turn on the most advanced, sophisticated policies right from the start. And so really defining what compliance means. Today we showed you a lot of different examples. There's some basic compliance configurations that you can do with your management tool to get the device kind of shored up right. You can use a lot of the stuff that Nick walked through around how you can get a little bit further into the security insights, managing CVEs and looking at out-of-date applications and the like through the security lens. But then we can also start to control the flow of data from the device. I think you had a great suggestion of putting stuff in the cloud, but what about restricting the flow of data to cloud hosting services and other tools that the user might natively try to utilize to dump data because it's convenient, but it might not be appropriate for the organization. It's the building blocks, bringing it back to the absolute basics and just thinking about what does basic management on the device look like, and how do I start to dial in some of those security controls so that you get to that better posture over time that you just keep notching up year over year, I think.
I'll add one thing, because I know this is a long-winded answer, but so if you remember back to that diagram I showed with Connect ZTNA on the left-hand side, so the ability to quote-unquote safeguard all your SaaS traffic, I think is a really good start, if you will, because that'll encrypt all that access, and then you can add the protect risk-based detection, and then on the right-hand side, to Michael's point, what a lot of people do is they'll kind of use Jamf protected content filter and say, yes, we want to enable access to the left-hand side of the cloud, but to the right-hand side, we want to restrict TikTok, restrict, other cloud file storages, et cetera. So the ability to allow what you want and deny what you want, you could do, I guess, with Jamf Trust. So.
Great, thank you. And Jackson, where are you? If you could wave your hand. I did see
Yeah.
your shameless plug. Okay,
Yeah.
so Jackson is with Pacific Dental, and we'll be hosting a session, it's tomorrow,
nice.
right? About Jamf setup for purpose-driven devices in, if you type in 1072 into the search field, you can find that session. So thanks for putting that in there. The last question we have before we go, one other one just popped in. Oh, okay. Yeah, the most upvoted question, if you've looked in there, which is, why does Michael not have a Jamf T-shirt on? Which I'm assuming the answer is because he's going to Superman out of the sport coat at a later time. But that was the last one, so I'm just going to answer that for you, if that's okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much for joining us. Don't forget the next most important session, which is lunch, which is happening now. Appreciate your time. Thank you all for speaking to us today. Appreciate that as well. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks.
Thanks.